It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me, the quiet lake, and the solitude of a secluded cabin. But what I had failed to prepare for was the lake itself. There's something about a body of water, something so ancient and vast, that it feels like it's hiding secrets you couldn't even begin to imagine. And the lake I found myself beside on this trip, it had plenty of secrets. I had arrived late in the evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, leaving only a golden glow on the water's surface. The cabin was charming in an old-fashioned way. It was nestled in the woods, a stone's throw away from the water's edge. The kind of place where you could imagine people coming to escape the world, to disconnect from everything and everyone. And that's exactly what I thought I wanted. But the moment I stepped out onto the porch, I noticed something strange. The air was thick with silence, too heavy for a place surrounded by nature. The trees, normally so full of life, seemed unnaturally still. The faint rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, even the wind, were all missing. All I could hear was the water, lapping gently against the shore. I shrugged it off. Perhaps it was the isolation making me a little more sensitive. After all, I had driven for hours to get here. A weekend away was all I needed. I unpacked, made myself a cup of tea, and decided to go for a walk around the lake before it got too dark. As I walked, I noticed the water's surface wasn't as calm as it should have been. The ripples were far too erratic, like something had disturbed it beneath the surface. A bird, a fish, or maybe just the wind, I thought. But still, the feeling of unease lingered in my chest. The first night, I didn't hear anything strange. Just the normal sounds of an isolated cabin at night, creaks in the walls, the occasional gust of wind shaking the windows. But the second night, around midnight, was when it began. The sound broke the silence with such force that it made my heart skip a beat. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Perhaps a distant animal or even the wind carrying some strange noise. But then, it came again, a scream. It wasn't an ordinary scream, though. It was high-pitched, desperate, and filled with an eerie kind of sorrow that sent chills down my spine. I froze, my body stiff with the shock of it. The scream seemed to come from deep within the lake, as though someone, or something, was calling from beneath its dark surface. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was nothing. But every time I closed my eyes to sleep, the scream would echo in my mind, and my dreams were filled with visions of someone, no, something, lurking just below the water, watching me. The third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was louder now, and more frequent. My mind raced. Could it be some kind of local folklore? Was the lake haunted? I had heard rumors, of course, but who believed in that kind of thing? But the screams, they were real. They were too real to dismiss. I needed answers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was only one place to go, down to the shore. That's where I first met her. Her name was Lily. She was a local woman, someone I'd seen at the small town store earlier that week, buying a few things for herself. When I saw her by the water, I had been half surprised, half relieved. Maybe she had answers. She was standing there, gazing out at the lake as the moonlight reflected off its black surface, her expression vacant and sorrowful. "Are you okay?" I asked hesitantly, stepping closer. She didn't turn to look at me right away. But then, she slowly shifted her gaze toward me, and I saw the pain in her eyes, something dark, almost haunted. You hear it too, don't you? Her voice was low, barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might summon something more dangerous. I nodded. The scream. What is it? Lily sighed deeply, rubbing her eyes. She glanced back toward the lake, and I followed her gaze. The water shimmered unnaturally under the moonlight, but there was a darkness to it, a depth I couldn't quite fathom. They say it's the spirit of a woman, Lily began, her voice barely audible over the wind. She drowned in the lake many years ago, before I was born, even. But her spirit never left. People in the town say she's trapped there, calling out to anyone who comes too close, hoping to drag them into the depths. I swallowed hard. A spirit? That's what the scream was. But Lily wasn't finished. They say she's not alone, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. Others have drowned in these waters. But they were different. They weren't looking for help. They were angry. Her voice faltered, and she looked away, as though remembering something too terrible to speak of. Before I could ask any more questions, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I was left standing there, my mind racing. What Lily said didn't make sense. A woman, angry spirits, drowning? Was it possible? Or was she just a local superstitious woman feeding me stories to scare me? But the scream was real. It had to be. I spent the next few days trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I couldn't stop thinking about the lake, about the scream, about what Lily had said. My sleep was fitful, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the woman in the lake, her face twisted in agony. But then something happened that made everything I'd been feeling all too real. I woke up on the fifth night to a different kind of scream. This one was sharper, louder, closer. It came from inside the cabin. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The scream, this time, it was right outside my window. It wasn't the echoing cry from the depths of the lake. No. This was different. It was closer, almost as if it were coming from inside the cabin itself. I could hear the wind howling outside, but the scream was sharper, more frantic. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't move. My breath quickened. I was paralyzed with fear. Was it her? The woman in the lake? Was she really inside? I must have drifted off again in my terror, because the next thing I knew, the room was silent. The oppressive quiet had returned. I cautiously got out of bed, my legs shaky beneath me. My mind raced as I moved toward the window. The moonlight filtered through the drawn curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I was about to draw them back when I saw it, a shadow crossing in front of the cabin door. A figure. For a moment, I stood frozen in place, unsure of what I had just seen. My heart was still pounding, but now there was a strange mix of fear and curiosity in my chest. I couldn't just ignore it. I had to know what was going on. I quickly grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand and stepped cautiously to the door. With every step, the cold, unnerving silence seemed to grow. I opened the door slowly, peeking out into the night, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was nothing. Just the stillness of the woods around me. I let out a shaky breath, relieved yet unsettled. Maybe I had imagined the shadow. Maybe it was just my overactive imagination playing tricks on me after the scream. I stepped back inside, my pulse racing. But as I turned to close the door, my heart skipped a beat. There, right in front of the doorframe, was something that hadn't been there before, a deep, black smear on the wood, as if something, or someone, had dragged itself across the surface. I reached out cautiously, my fingers brushing against the cold, slick mark. It felt wrong. Too wrong. I felt an icy chill crawl up my spine as I backed away quickly. My thoughts were scattered, and my heart raced even faster than before. I couldn't stay here anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The next morning, I decided to seek out Lily again. She seemed to know more about the lake and its haunted past than anyone else. I drove to the small store in the town, where I had met her before. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, but this time, Lily wasn't there. I asked the clerk if she had seen Lily recently. His eyes darkened when I mentioned her name. She doesn't come around much anymore, he said, his voice low, almost fearful. Ever since the incident. What incident? I asked, a sense of dread creeping up on me. He hesitated, looking over his shoulder before leaning in closer. It's not just the woman in the lake, he whispered. There's a curse. It's been on that water for generations. People who come here, people who stay too long, don't come out the same. Some don't come out at all. The words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. What do you mean, they don't come out? I pressed. He glanced nervously toward the back of the store. People disappear. They go missing. Others, they hear things, voices, whispers. But the worst part is when they start to hear the screaming. They can't stop it. It gets louder. Until it drives them mad. Is Lily? I started, but the clerk had already turned away, his eyes filled with fear. I left the store with more questions than answers, and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I had to confront Lily. I had to get to the bottom of this. The screaming, the curse, the strange figure I saw last night, it all had to be connected. I walked down to the lake, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick trees around me. I could feel the weight of the lake pressing down on me. Its dark waters seemed to beckon, pulling me closer with an invisible force. When I reached the shore, I saw her. Lily was standing at the edge of the water, just like before, staring out into the abyss. Lily! I called out, my voice trembling. She turned to face me, her eyes wide and hollow. She didn't look surprised to see me, only weary, as though she had been expecting this moment for far too long. You heard it, didn't you? She asked quietly. The scream. I nodded. Lily, what's going on? Why is this happening? She took a slow step toward me, her gaze never leaving the lake. It's not just a curse, she whispered. It's a binding. The spirit, the woman who drowned, she's trapped there, but she's not alone. There are others who are stuck in the lake with her. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. But why is she calling to me? Lily met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her own. Because it's your turn. She's been watching you since the moment you arrived. The lake, it chooses. And now it's chosen you. Suddenly, the scream pierced the night again, louder and closer than ever before. I felt my entire body freeze as I turned to look at the water. The figure, the woman, was there, standing just beneath the surface, her pale face twisted in agony. It was no longer a story. No longer a myth. The spirit was real. The woman in the lake stared back at me, her hollow eyes filled with torment and fury. She was no longer an abstract fear, a story told to scare people. She was real, right there in front of me, a specter of sorrow and rage, her hands reaching up from the water as though trying to claw her way out of the lake's depths. I wanted to run, to flee back to the cabin, to escape this nightmare. But I couldn't move. My body was frozen, trapped in place by some unseen force, the dark water drawing me in like a magnet. Lily stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the woman's figure. You can't escape it, she whispered. Once the lake chooses you, there's no turning back. I looked at her, desperate for some kind of answer, some way to understand what was happening. What is she? What does she want from me? Lily's voice trembled. She wants you to join her. The others too. She's not the only one. She's only the one that calls out. They all drown. They all sink into the darkness. They all become part of the lake. I swallowed, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. What happened to you? Why didn't you get taken? Lily's face darkened. Because I ran away. I was too scared to face it. And now I'm a part of it. The lake has me. It never lets go. She glanced at me, a sad smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. But you're stronger. You can fight it. The scream came again, louder now, and the water began to churn violently. It was as if something beneath the surface was stirring, its restless energy building to a climax. My heart pounded as I realized I was standing on the edge of something far darker than I had ever imagined. I stepped back, trembling. What do I have to do? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. How do I stop it? Lily hesitated, her eyes filled with both fear and a strange, resigned knowledge. You have to confront the spirit. Her spirit. She's been waiting for someone brave enough to face her. She's calling to you because she knows you're the one who can help her rest. I felt a chill creep up my spine. You mean I have to help her? Lily nodded slowly. The woman in the lake wasn't always a spirit. She was once a person, a woman who drowned many years ago. But she wasn't alone in the water when it happened. She was the last one to go under, the one who's still trapped there. Her soul can't move on, because she's chained to the lake, trapped by the others who died with her. I stared at her, horrified by the thought. But if I help her, what happens to me? What happens to my soul? Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a long, slow breath, her eyes never leaving the lake. It's not that simple. You're not just helping her. You'll have to face the others. The spirits. The ones who don't want to be freed. I felt a cold shiver run through me. It was as if the very air around me had turned to ice. Why me? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the wind. Why did the lake choose me? Lily looked at me, her eyes filled with pity. Because you're the one who's strong enough to face it. The lake only calls those who are strong, those who are ready. But you have to make a choice. You can fight it and leave, or you can face the truth and become a part of it. Either way, you'll be changed forever. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with all the possibilities. The scream echoed through the air again, growing louder. It felt like the very ground beneath me was shaking with the power of it. I could feel the spirits of the lake, watching, waiting. I glanced back at Lily. She was staring at the water, her face a mixture of longing and regret. If I do this, what happens to me? I asked again, the fear consuming me. Lily looked up at me one last time, a tear running down her cheek. You may never leave. But if you do, if you truly face the woman in the lake, you might be able to break the curse. But be warned, some curses never truly break. They just change shape. I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering the courage I didn't know I had. My pulse thundered in my ears as I took one final step toward the water. The woman in the lake was waiting. And I was ready to confront her. As I stepped closer to the shore, I could feel the weight of the water pulling at my very soul. It was as if the lake itself was trying to drag me under, to drown me in its cold, endless depths. The woman's face was clearer now, her eyes wide with pain and rage, her mouth open in a silent scream that seemed to echo in my bones. I could hear the whispers now, voices from the water, calling my name, begging me to join them. But I fought it. I refused to let the fear control me. I knelt down by the water's edge, my heart pounding, and I whispered into the darkness. I'm not afraid of you. The woman's face twisted, her eyes narrowing as though she had heard me. The waters began to churn again, violently, as if the lake was trying to pull me under. I could feel it tugging at my body, dragging me closer to the surface. I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself against the pull. The voices from the water grew louder, and I felt the cold fingers of the spirits brush against my skin. I could see the shapes of the drowned souls emerging from the depths, their eyes vacant and haunting. But then, through the chaos of the lake's fury, I saw her, the woman. She was closer now, her form clearer, her face twisted in anguish. I could feel her pain, her sorrow, and her anger. And I understood. She didn't want to drag me into the water. She didn't want to take me with her. She wanted release. She wanted to move on. But there was only one way for that to happen. With one final breath, I reached into the water, my hand trembling as I touched the surface. The coldness of it seeped into my very bones, but I kept going, deeper and deeper into the lake's depths. The woman reached out to me, her cold fingers brushing against my own. Let me help you, I whispered. I'll set you free." The water surged, and everything went black. When I awoke, I was no longer by the lake. I was in the cabin, the morning sun shining through the window. The air was thick with silence, but it wasn't the oppressive quiet that had haunted me before. The spirits were gone. The scream had stopped. The curse was broken. But as I looked out at the lake from the cabin's window, I could still feel the weight of the woman's presence. Her spirit was no longer trapped, but a part of me knew that the lake would always hold her memory. And as I walked away from the cabin, I felt the water's cold grasp loosen. The screams of the past were gone. But I would never forget.